Keanu Reeves sacrifices his life to save teacher from shooting. The auditorium buzzed with excitement, the kind of energy that only came when someone truly larger than life stepped into the room. Keanu Reeves, dressed in his signature black suit and tie, stood at the podium, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the crowd of teenagers who whispered eagerly to one another. For many of them, it was surreal to see the man they had grown up watching in movies, standing just a few feet away, speaking about resilience, kindness, and the importance of making a difference in the world. "Life is about choices," Keanu said, his voice measured yet warm, as if he were addressing each individual directly. "Sometimes, we don't get to choose the circumstances we face, but we always get to choose how we respond to them." He paused, scanning the audience with a gentle smile. "And the way we respond, especially in the hardest moments, that's what defines who we are." Among the students sat Ms. Harper, the school's English teacher, her hands clasped tightly as she listened to every word. She had invited Keanu to the school after months of coordinating through charity organizations and his management team. To her, this wasn't just about having a celebrity visit. It was about hope. Her students, many of whom faced daily challenges, needed to hear a voice that could inspire them to keep going. Keanu's words continued to flow, a mix of personal anecdotes and thought-provoking reflections, but beneath the surface of his calm delivery, he noticed something unusual. There was a tension in the air that wasn't just the typical excitement of a captivated crowd. The security guards near the auditorium doors exchanged furtive glances, their hands hovering near their radios. Keanu's instincts, honed over years of navigating high-stakes situations both on and off-screen, told him something was wrong. At the back of the room, a student shifted nervously in their seat, whispering to their friend. The faint sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, quick and uneven. Keanu's eyes flickered toward the noise, but he didn't let his concern show. Instead, he wrapped up his speech with a note of encouragement. "Remember," he said, his voice steady, "every day is a chance to be better, to help someone else, and to make this world a little brighter. Don't ever underestimate the power you have to make a difference." The room erupted into applause, the sound filling the space and momentarily drowning out the unease. Keanu stepped down from the podium, shaking hands with students who eagerly lined up to meet him. Ms. Harper approached, her face lit with gratitude. "You were incredible," she said, her voice soft but genuine. "I can't thank you enough for coming here. It means so much to them, and to me." Keanu smiled, his humility evident in the way he deflected the praise. "It's my pleasure, really. These kids, they're the future. Anything I can do to help, I'm here." But the moment of connection was interrupted by the sound of a faint commotion outside the auditorium. The doors opened slightly, just enough for one of the security guards to poke his head in and make a quick hand signal toward another guard stationed near the stage. Keanu's eyes narrowed slightly. He wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but his instincts screamed that something wasn't right. "Ms. Harper," he said quietly, his tone shifting to something more serious, "stay with the students for a moment. I'm going to check on what's happening." She hesitated, her brow furrowing. "Is everything okay?" "I'm not sure," Keanu admitted, already moving toward the exit. "But I'll find out." As he stepped into the hallway, the atmosphere changed immediately. The once bustling corridor was eerily silent, save for the faint hum of fluorescent lights. A security guard approached him quickly, his face pale and lined with worry. "Mr. Reeves," the guard began, his voice low, "we might have a situation. There's a report of an armed individual on the premises. We're trying to confirm it now." Keanu's stomach tightened, but his face remained calm. "What's being done to keep the students safe?" "We've initiated a lockdown," the guard replied. "Teachers have been notified, and classrooms are being secured as we speak. The auditorium is a challenge because of how open it is, but we've got officers on their way." Keanu nodded, his mind racing. He didn't know the specifics of the threat, but he understood one thing clearly: time was critical. "I'll help however I can," he said firmly. "What do you need from me?" The guard hesitated, clearly taken aback by Keanu's willingness to step into the fray. "With all due respect, sir, you should stay out of harm's way. We can handle this." But Keanu didn't back down. "I'm not leaving those kids. Tell me what I can do." Before the guard could respond, the faint sound of something metallic hitting the floor echoed down the hallway. Keanu's head snapped toward the noise, his senses heightened. Without waiting for an answer, he moved toward the source, his footsteps silent and deliberate. Around the corner, he caught sight of a figure moving in the shadows. The person was dressed in dark clothing, their posture tense, and in their hand was a weapon that glinted faintly under the harsh lights. Keanu's breath hitched for just a moment, but he quickly steadied himself. He needed to act carefully. "Hey," Keanu called out, his voice firm but calm. "Let's talk." The figure froze, their head turning slightly toward him. For a split second, Keanu thought he saw hesitation in their movements, but it was quickly replaced by a defensive stance. The gunmen raised their weapon, pointing it in Keanu's direction. Keanu lifted his hands slowly, showing he was unarmed. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said evenly. "I just want to help." "Stay back," the gunmen shouted, their voice shaking. "Don't come any closer." Keanu stopped, his hands still raised, his heart pounding. He could see the fear in the gunman's eyes, a fear that spoke of desperation and pain. "I hear you," he said gently. "I'll stay right here. But I need you to tell me what's going on. Why are you here?" The gunman's grip on the weapon tightened, but their voice cracked as they spoke. "You don't understand. None of you do. This isn't what I wanted, but I don't have a choice." Keanu's mind worked quickly, piecing together what little information he had. He needed to keep the conversation going, to buy time and keep the gunman focused on him rather than the hundreds of students just a few steps away. "You're right," he said softly. "I don't understand what you're going through. But I want to. Let me help you. Tell me what's wrong." The gunmen hesitated, their breathing uneven. For a moment, it seemed like they might lower the weapon, but the sound of approaching footsteps down the hallway shattered the fragile connection. The gunmen whirled around, their panic escalating. "Don't come any closer," they screamed, their voice filled with raw emotion. Keanu stepped forward instinctively, his hands still raised. "It's okay," he said firmly. "Focus on me. I'm right here. Let's figure this out together." The hallway was a taut thread of tension, with Keanu standing still, hands raised, and the gunman's weapon trembling in their grasp. Every second stretched like an eternity as Keanu carefully measured his words, hoping to defuse the situation without escalating it further. "You're scared," Keanu said softly, his voice steady yet empathetic. "I can see that. And that's okay. Whatever's brought you here, you don't have to face it alone. Let me help." The gunman's breathing quickened, their shoulders stiffening. "You can't help me." "No one can," they muttered, their voice laced with bitterness. "You think you know what it's like? You think someone like you..." Their voice broke off, and they laughed bitterly. "You don't understand what it feels like to have nothing, to be invisible." Keanu didn't flinch. He met the gunman's gaze, his own steady and unwavering. "Maybe I don't know exactly what you're feeling," he admitted, his tone sincere. "But I felt loss. I felt invisible, like the world just keeps moving while you're standing still, wondering how it all went so wrong. And I've learned something. You don't have to do this." The words lingered in the air, hanging between them like a fragile bridge. The gunmen blinked, their grip faltering for a split second before tightening again. Keanu noticed, but he didn't react outwardly. Instead, he took another step closer, moving slowly, deliberately, his hands still raised. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone," Keanu continued, his voice low and calm. "Not like this. Whatever you've been through, whatever's weighing on you, it doesn't have to end here. There's another way." Behind him, Keanu could hear the faint crackle of a radio, the sound of security guards coordinating just out of sight. He knew they were waiting, watching, trying to figure out the best moment to intervene. But he also knew that one wrong move could send everything spiraling out of control. The gunman's eyes darted between Keanu and the faint shadows of movement down the hallway. Their fingers twitched on the weapon's grip. "They don't care," the gunman spat, their voice trembling. "None of them care about me. They just want to lock me up, forget I exist. And maybe that's all I deserve." "No," Keanu said firmly, his voice cutting through the gunman's spiral of despair. "That's not true. You deserve to be heard, to be seen. But right now, you're not giving anyone a chance to understand you." Let me be that chance. Please. The gunman's lip quivered, and for a moment, their weapon lowered slightly. Keanu could feel the tide beginning to shift, the weight of the gunman's pain tipping towards something softer, something vulnerable. But the moment was fleeting. A distant sound, shuffling footsteps, too loud and too close, echoed through the hallway. The gunmen snapped back to attention, their weapon jerking up again as their body tensed with renewed panic. "Stay back," they screamed, their voice cracking under the strain. "I'll do it. Don't test me." Keanu's heart pounded, but his expression remained calm, his movements deliberate as he raised his hands higher. "It's okay," he said quickly, his voice soothing. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm right here. Just focus on me." The gunmen's breathing was ragged now, their chest heaving as they struggled to process the chaos in their mind. "Why are you even doing this?" they demanded, their voice hoarse. "Why do you care?" Keanu took a slow, measured breath. "Because everyone deserves a second chance," he said simply. "Even you. Especially you." For a moment, silence fell over the hallway, broken only by the distant hum of fluorescent lights. The gunman's eyes, wide and glassy, flicked back and forth as if searching for something, an answer, a way out, or maybe just a shred of hope. Keanu held their gaze, steady and unwavering, his own eyes full of quiet resolve. "You don't know me," the gunman whispered, their voice almost too soft to hear. "You don't know what I've done. What I've lost." "You're right," Keanu replied gently. "I don't know your story, but I'd like to. You don't have to carry it alone." The gunman's grip on the weapon loosened slightly, their shoulders sagging under the weight of their emotions. For a fleeting moment, Keanu thought he saw a crack in the armor, a glimmer of vulnerability that might lead to resolution. But just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. From behind the corner, a security guard stepped into view, their weapon drawn and pointed at the gunman. The sight of the uniform and the raised firearms sent a fresh wave of panic through the gunmen, who raised their weapon instinctively, the tension snapping back into place like a rubber band. "Don't move," the guard shouted, their voice sharp and commanding. "No," Keanu said urgently, turning slightly toward the guard without lowering his hands. "Don't do this. I've got it under control. Just give us a moment." The guard hesitated, their gaze flicking between Keanu and the gunman, who was now visibly trembling, their entire body quaking under the weight of fear and desperation. The gunman's finger hovered dangerously close to the trigger. "I can't," the gunman whispered, their voice cracking. "I can't go back. I can't." "You don't have to," Keanu said firmly, stepping closer despite the guard's alarmed expression. "Listen to me. Just put the gun down, and we'll figure this out together. No one's going to hurt you." "You don't understand," the gunman cried, their voice breaking into a sob. "I don't have anyone. I'm nothing." "That's not true," Keanu interrupted, his voice steady but filled with an almost tangible warmth. "You're not nothing. You're here. You're alive. And that means you still have a chance to make things right." The words hung in the air, resonating like the slow, steady toll of a bell. Keanu could see the conflict playing out on the gunman's face, the fear, the anger, the deep, aching sorrow. Slowly, carefully, he extended one hand, palm up, as if to offer them something invisible yet immeasurably valuable. "Trust me," he said softly. "Just this once. Trust me." The gunman's hand trembled, the weapon wavering as they stared at Keanu with tear-filled eyes. For a moment, it seemed like they might lower it, like the fragile connection between them might finally hold. But the sound of approaching footsteps shattered the moment once again. Two more security guards rounded the corner, their weapons drawn and their commands overlapping in a chaotic flurry. The gunmen flinched, their eyes wide with terror as they swung the weapon toward the new threat. "Stand down," one of the guards shouted, their voice sharp and unyielding. "Wait," Keanu yelled, stepping in front of the gunman without hesitation. His movement was swift and deliberate, his arms outstretched as if shielding the gunman from the world. "Don't. They're scared. Just give me a second." The guards froze, their weapons still raised but their expressions uncertain. Keanu turned back to the gunman, his voice low and urgent. "Look at me," he said. "Just me. Forget about them. You're safe. I promise." The gunmen's breathing was ragged, their chest heaving as they stared at Keanu, caught between fight and flight. The tears streaming down their face glistened under the harsh lights, their pain laid bare for all to see. "I don't know what to do," they whispered, their voice trembling. "I don't know how to fix this." Keanu's expression softened, his voice like a bomb. "You don't have to fix it all at once," he said gently. "But you can take the first step right now. Just give me the gun. Please." The gunmen hesitated, their hand trembling as they looked down at the weapon in their grasp. Slowly, painfully, they began to lower it, the weight of their decision visible in every movement. Keanu held his breath, his entire focus on the gunmen, as if willing them to let go of their pain. The hallway seemed to hold its breath as the gunman's grip loosened, the weapon dipping slightly lower. Keanu stayed still, his eyes locked on theirs, his hands still outstretched as if offering a lifeline. The seconds dragged on, heavy and suffocating, the tension palpable in the air. "You're doing the right thing," Keanu said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just let me take it. You're not alone anymore. I'm here." The gunmen's lips trembled, their shoulders shaking as suppressed sobs broke free. Their pain was raw and overwhelming, filling the space like a physical force. Keanu didn't rush them. He stayed where he was, unwavering, a pillar of calm in the storm. From the corner of his eye, Keanu noticed the security guards shifting slightly, their weapons still raised, their fingers twitching nervously near the triggers. He knew how easily the moment could spiral out of control, how a single misunderstanding or misstep could ignite chaos. He needed to keep the focus on himself, to ensure no one acted impulsively. "Hey," he said gently, drawing the gunman's attention back to him. "You're safe. I promise. No one's going to hurt you." The gunmen sniffled, their gaze flickering between Keanu and the guards. "How can you say that?" they muttered, their voice cracking. "How can you promise that when they're just waiting to—" "They're just scared," Keanu interrupted, his tone firm but understanding. "Just like you are. But we can end this together. You don't have to carry this alone." The gunmen stared at him, their expression a mix of desperation and disbelief. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, they began to lower the weapon further. Keanu's heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his breathing steady, his movements controlled. Every fiber of his being was focused on the fragile connection he had built. "You're stronger than this moment," Keanu said, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "You have the power to choose how it ends. Not them, not anyone else." The gunman's fingers loosened, and the weapon dipped lower still. Keanu took a cautious step forward, closing the distance between them inch by inch. The security guards tensed behind him, their movements drawing the gunman's attention again. "Stop," the gunman cried out, their voice laced with panic. "I can't, don't come closer." Keanu froze immediately, his hands still raised. "Okay," he said quickly. "I'll stay right here. Just breathe. You're in control." The gunman's chest heaved as they struggled to catch their breath, their hands trembling so violently that the weapon shook in their grasp. Tears streamed down their face, and for a moment, they looked like a lost child, overwhelmed and broken. Keanu's voice softened even further, his tone almost fatherly. "It's okay to be scared," he said. "It's okay to feel lost. But this isn't the end of your story. It doesn't have to be." The gunman's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Their knees buckled slightly, and they staggered back a step, their grip faltering. Keanu took a small, tentative step forward, his hand outstretched. "Let me help," he said, his voice almost a plea. "Please." Finally, the gunman's fingers slackened, and the weapon slipped from their grasp, clattering loudly to the floor. The sound echoed through the hallway like a thunderclap, startling everyone into motion. The security guards surged forward, shouting commands and moving to secure the scene. "Wait," Keanu called out, holding up a hand to stop them. "Give them space." The guards hesitated, their movements stalling as they glanced at one another uncertainly. Keanu stepped forward carefully, placing himself between the gunmen and the approaching guards. He knelt slowly, picking up the weapon and holding it out to the nearest guard, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Here," he said quietly. "It's over." The guard took the weapon cautiously, their expression a mix of relief and lingering tension. Keanu turned back to the gunmen, who had collapsed to their knees, their face buried in their hands as they sobbed uncontrollably. "It's okay," Keanu murmured, crouching down to their level. "You're okay. You're safe now." The gunmen shook their head, their voice muffled by their hands. I didn't want this," they choked out. I didn't know what else to do." Keanu placed a gentle hand on their shoulder, his touch light but grounding. "I know," he said softly. "I know it feels like the world's against you. But it's not too late to find another way. There's still hope." The gunmen's sobs subsided slightly, their breathing uneven as they looked up at Keanu with red, tear-streaked eyes. "Why are you doing this?" they asked, their voice barely audible. "Why do you care?" Keanu's expression softened, his gaze filled with empathy. "Because everyone deserves a second chance," he said simply. "I've been given second chances in my life, and I know how much they can mean. You're not alone anymore." The words seemed to pierce through the fog of the gunmen's despair. They nodded shakily, their body trembling as they let out a deep, shuddering breath. Keanu helped them to their feet slowly, steadying them as they swayed. Behind him, the security guards moved cautiously forward, their postures still tense but less aggressive. One of them stepped closer, speaking into their radio to alert the responding officers that the situation had been de-escalated. "Mr. Reeves," the lead guard said, his tone a mix of respect and concern. "Thank you for what you did, but we'll take it from here." Keanu nodded, his expression calm but resolute. "Be gentle with them," he said quietly. "They need help, not punishment." The guard hesitated, then gave a small nod, signaling to his colleagues to approach with care. As the guards took over, gently escorting the gunmen away, Keanu stepped back, his shoulders sagging slightly as the adrenaline began to fade. Ms. Harper appeared at the end of the hallway, her face pale and stricken as she rushed toward him. "Keanu," she cried, her voice filled with both relief and worry. "Are you okay? What happened?" Keanu turned to her, his tired smile offering reassurance. "It's over," he said simply. "Everyone's safe." Ms. Harper reached out, gripping his arm as if to steady herself. Her eyes darted toward the departing guards and the subdued gunmen, her expression a mix of shock and gratitude. "You saved them," she whispered. "You saved all of us." Keanu shook his head slightly, his humility shining through even in the aftermath of such a harrowing moment. "They just needed someone to listen," he said quietly. "Sometimes that's all it takes." Ms. Harper's eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Keanu replied, his voice warm but firm. "Just take care of them. All of them." The faint wail of sirens grew louder in the distance as police cars and ambulances pulled up outside the school. The once silent hallway now buzzed with activity as first responders flooded the scene, assessing the situation and offering support to shaken students and staff. Keanu stepped aside, allowing the professionals to take over. But even as the chaos began to subside, his mind lingered on the gunmen, the pain in their eyes, the weight of their despair. He knew the road ahead for them would be long and difficult, but he held on to the hope that his actions had planted a seed of change. As Ms. Harper stood beside him, her hand still resting on his arm, she looked up at him with a newfound respect and admiration. "You're not just a hero on screen," she said softly. "You're the real deal." Keanu chuckled lightly, shaking his head. "I'm just a guy trying to do the right thing," he said. "That's all any of us can do." As the hallways buzzed with the activity of first responders and shaken staff, Keanu quietly stepped back, blending into the periphery. He wasn't the type to bask in attention or accolades, and right now, the focus needed to remain on helping the students and staff process what had happened. He leaned against the wall, his head tilted slightly upward as he took in a deep breath, letting the events replay in his mind. Ms. Harper stood beside him, her eyes still glistening with unshed tears. "You didn't just save lives today," she said, her voice low but brimming with emotion. "You changed one too. That young man. He's still alive because you showed him kindness?" Keanu didn't respond immediately. He folded his arms, his gaze distant. "He's in a lot of pain," he said softly. "More than we saw today. That kind of pain doesn't go away easily." Ms. Harper studied his face, her expression thoughtful. "You seem to know exactly what to say to him," she said after a moment. "How to reach him? Most people wouldn't have even tried." Keanu turned to her, a small, tired smile playing on his lips. "I don't know if I did the right thing," he admitted. I've been through my own darkness. I know what it feels like to be on the edge and think there's no way back. Sometimes all it takes is someone reaching out to remind you that there is." Her expression softened, her admiration deepening. "You didn't just reach out. You put yourself in harm's way for all of us. That's not something many people would do." Keanu shook his head slightly. "It's not about being a hero," he said. "It's about being human. We're all in this together, whether we realize it or not." The sound of approaching footsteps drew their attention. One of the responding officers, a middle-aged man with a no-nonsense demeanor, approached Keanu and Ms. Harper. His expression was calm but professional, his sharp eyes taking in Keanu's relaxed yet resolute posture. "Mr. Reeves," the officer said, his tone respectful. "I'm Officer Daniels. I just wanted to say thank you for what you did today. It's not often someone steps up the way you did." Keanu inclined his head slightly, his expression humble. "I did what anyone would do in that situation," he replied. "I'm just glad no one was hurt." Daniels raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "I've been on the force for 20 years, he said. "Trust me, not everyone would have handled it the way you did. You kept things from escalating and you gave that kid a chance. That's rare." Keanu shifted slightly, uncomfortable with the praise. "He needed someone to listen," he said simply. "That's all I did." Daniels studied him for a moment before nodding. "Well, whatever you did, it worked. The gunman's in custody now, and it looks like they're going to get the help they need. But if you hadn't stepped in, this could have ended very differently." Ms. Harper placed a hand on Keanu's arm, her touch light but grounding. "It's true," she said softly. "You didn't just save lives. You gave that young man a chance to start over." Keanu's gaze dropped to the floor, a flicker of emotion crossing his face. He thought back to the raw pain in the gunman's eyes, the way their voice had cracked as they spoke of feeling invisible. It was a feeling Keanu knew all too well, a shadow that had lingered over his own life during its darkest moments. "Sometimes it takes hitting rock bottom to find a way back up," Keanu said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "I just hope he gets the support he needs to climb out." Daniels nodded, his expression thoughtful. "The system doesn't always make that easy," he admitted. "But we'll do what we can to make sure he's taken care of." Keanu met the officer's gaze, his eyes steady. "Good," he said simply. "Because no one should have to face that kind of pain alone." As Daniel stepped away to join his colleagues, Ms. Harper turned to Keanu, her expression a mix of admiration and concern. "You carry so much weight," she said softly. "Even when you're helping others, it feels like you're still fighting your own battles." Keanu smiled faintly, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Aren't we all?" he replied. "Life's messy. We all have things we carry. But that's why it's important to look out for each other." Ms. Harper nodded, her hand still resting lightly on his arm. "You do more than look out for people," she said. "You remind them that they matter. That's a rare gift." Keanu's smile grew, though it remained tinged with melancholy. "We all matter," he said. "Sometimes we just need someone to remind us." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of students filing out of their classrooms, their voices hushed and tinged with uncertainty. The lockdown had been lifted, and the school staff was working to guide everyone toward the exits in an orderly manner. Parents were already gathering outside, their faces etched with worry as they waited to reunite with their children. Keanu watched the scene unfold, his heart heavy yet hopeful. The chaos of the day was beginning to settle, but he knew the ripples of its impact would linger for a long time. He could see it in the students' faces, in their wide eyes and uncertain expressions, in the way they clung to one another as they walked. Ms. Harper followed his gaze, her own expression somber. "They'll remember this day for the rest of their lives," she said quietly. "But at least they'll remember it as a day they were saved, not a day they lost everything." Keanu nodded, his jaw tightening. "It's not enough," he said, his voice low. "There's so much more we need to do to keep this from happening again." Ms. Harper looked at him, her eyes searching his face. You've already done more than most would, she said. But I understand. It doesn't feel like enough when you know the problem runs deeper. Keanu exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging slightly. It's not about being a hero, he said. It's about making a difference, no matter how small. But sometimes it feels like we're just putting out fires instead of addressing the root causes. Ms. Harper nodded, her expression thoughtful. You're right, she said. But every fire you put out gives someone a chance to heal, to grow. And that matters. Keanu turned to her, his gaze softening. You're a good teacher, he said. Not just to your students, but to everyone around you. She smiled, her cheeks flushing slightly. Coming from you, that means a lot, she said. But I think we both know it takes more than one person to make a difference. It takes a community. Keanu nodded, his expression resolute. Then let's build one, he said. A community that stands together, that looks out for each other. A community that reminds people they're not alone. Ms. Harper's smile widened, her eyes shining with determination. I'd like that, she said. And I know the kids would too. They need to see that even in the darkest moments, there's hope. Keanu glanced back at the students, who were slowly making their way toward the exits, their steps hesitant but steady. Hope, he repeated softly. It's a powerful thing. As the last of the students filed out, Keanu and Ms. Harper followed, their steps in sync as they walked toward the front doors. The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the school's courtyard, where parents embraced their children and staff members exchanged quiet words of comfort. Keanu paused at the threshold, his gaze sweeping over the scene. He felt a pang of sadness for the pain and fear that had unfolded here today, but he also felt a flicker of hope for the resilience he saw in the faces around him. Today was hard, he said quietly, but it doesn't have to define them. It can be the start of something better. Ms. Harper nodded, her hand resting lightly on his arm. It already is, she said. Because of you. Keanu smiled faintly, his eyes filled with both weariness and resolve. Because of all of us, he said. Together. The golden light of the setting sun bathed the courtyard, casting long shadows as families embraced their children and staff members stood in quiet clusters, exchanging words of comfort and reflection. Keanu stepped out into the open air, his shoulders slightly slouched, his normally unflappable composure tinged with the weight of the day. He scanned the scene, his sharp eyes observing the aftermath of the lockdown. Parents clutched their children tightly, some openly crying, while others whispered reassurances that everything was going to be okay. Keanu's gaze lingered on a young boy clutching his mother's hand. The boy glanced back at the school building, his face pale and his eyes wide with the kind of fear that didn't belong in someone so young. It twisted something deep in Keanu's chest, reigniting a familiar sense of purpose. Ms. Harper stood beside him, her hands clasped tightly in front of her as she watched the families reunite. They'll carry this with them, she said softly, her voice almost drowned out by the murmurs around them. Some of them might not even realize how much it's affected them until years later. Keanu nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. Fear like that doesn't just disappear, he replied. It leaves a mark. But maybe... He paused, his voice trailing off as he searched for the right words. Maybe it can also make them stronger, if they have the right support? Ms. Harper turned to him, her brow furrowed. Support like what you gave them today, she said. What you gave all of us. Keanu shook his head, his humility as steadfast as ever. It wasn't just me, he said. It was all of us. The teachers, the staff, the parents, even the kids. They were brave in a way most people never have to be. Ms. Harper smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Still, she said, her voice soft but firm, you gave them hope when they needed it most. And for that, I'll always be grateful. Keanu didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze back to the boy, who had stopped walking and was now staring up at him with wide, curious eyes. The boy's mother noticed and gave him a gentle nudge, whispering something in his ear. After a moment of hesitation, the boy let go of his mother's hand and took a few tentative steps toward Keanu. Hi, the boy said, his voice barely audible. He looked up at Keanu with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. You're the guy from the movies, right? Keanu crouched down to the boy's level, his lips curving into a warm, reassuring smile. "That's right," he said, his tone gentle. "But today, I'm just someone who wanted to help." The boy fidgeted with the hem of his shirt, his small hands trembling slightly. "Were you scared?" he asked, his eyes searching Keanu's face for an answer. Keanu's smile softened, his gaze steady. "Yeah," he admitted. "I was scared. But being scared doesn't mean you can't be brave. Sometimes, it just means you care enough to do what's right, even when it's hard." The boy tilted his head, considering Keanu's words. "You were really brave," he said after a moment. "I want to be brave like you someday." Keanu's heart clenched, and he reached out, resting a hand lightly on the boy's shoulder. "You already are," he said. "And as long as you remember that, you'll be able to face anything." The boy beamed at him, his fear momentarily forgotten, and Keanu felt a flicker of warmth cut through the heaviness of the day. The boy's mother approached, her expression a mix of gratitude and emotion. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't even know how to put it into words. You saved my son's life today." Keanu straightened, his humble demeanor firmly in place. "I just did what I could," he said simply. "The real heroes are the teachers and staff who kept everyone safe." The mother shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No," she said firmly. "You didn't just save him physically. You gave him hope. You showed him what it means to be strong and kind, even in the face of danger. That's something he'll carry with him forever." Keanu's expression softened, and he gave her a small nod. "Thank you," he said quietly. "But I think he's already stronger than he realizes." As the mother and son walked away, Keanu turned back to Ms. Harper, who was watching him with an expression of quiet admiration. "You have a way of connecting with people," she said. "Even in moments like this, you make them feel seen and valued." Keanu shrugged slightly, his hands slipping into his pockets. "It's not about me," he said. "It's about them. About making sure they know they're not alone." Ms. Harper smiled, though her eyes were still heavy with emotion. "That's a rare quality," she said. "And it's exactly what the world needs more of." Keanu looked away, his gaze sweeping over the courtyard once more. The sun had dipped lower on the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow over the scene. The chaos of the day was beginning to settle, but the weight of its impact lingered in the air, a reminder of how fragile life could be. "Do you ever feel like you're just one person trying to fix a broken system?" he asked suddenly, his voice quiet but tinged with frustration. "Like no matter what you do, it's never enough?" Ms. Harper tilted her head, considering his words. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then I remember that even small changes can ripple out into something bigger. What you did today might not fix everything, but it mattered. It mattered to that boy, to his mother, to everyone here. And that's worth something." Keanu nodded slowly, her words sinking in. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "It is." The two of them stood in companionable silence for a while, watching as the last of the families left the courtyard and the first responders began to wrap up their work. The school building loomed behind them, its empty windows reflecting the fading light. It felt strangely quiet now, almost peaceful, as if the building itself was exhaling after holding its breath for so long. "Do you think he'll be okay?" Ms. Harper asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Keanu didn't need to ask who she meant. His mind immediately went to the young gunman, who was likely sitting in the back of a police car somewhere, their world forever changed. He let out a slow breath, his gaze distant. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I hope so. I saw something in him today, a spark of something good. If the right people help him, maybe he can find his way back." Ms. Harper nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's hard to imagine being in his shoes," she said. "To feel so lost and hopeless that you think this is the only way out." "It is," Keanu agreed. "But it's a reminder of how important it is to look out for each other. To notice when someone's struggling before it gets to that point." Ms. Harper smiled faintly. "You're right," she said. "And you set an example today that I hope all of us can follow." Keanu glanced at her, his lips curving into a small, grateful smile. "We all have a role to play," he said. "Even if it's just listening or being there when someone needs us. It all makes a difference." The sound of a car horn broke through the quiet, and Keanu turned to see a black SUV idling at the edge of the parking lot. His driver was waiting, ready to take him back to the city. He turned back to Ms. Harper, his expression tinged with reluctance. "I guess that's my cue," he said. Ms. Harper nodded, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "Thank you again," she said. "For everything. You've given us all a lot to think about." Keanu extended a hand, and she took it, her grip firm but warm. "Take care of those kids," he said. "They're lucky to have someone like you." "And we're lucky to have someone like you," she replied. Keanu smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes, before releasing her hand and heading toward the SUV. As he climbed into the back seat, he glanced out the window, watching as Ms. Harper stood in the courtyard, her figure bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. The car pulled away, and Keanu leaned back in his seat, his mind already replaying the day's events. It wasn't over, not really. The ripples of what had happened today would spread far beyond the school, touching lives in ways he might never fully see or understand. But as the city skyline came into view, Keanu held on to the hope that, in some small way, he had made a difference. The SUV moved steadily down the freeway, the hum of the engine and the rhythmic whir of the tires providing a faint backdrop to Keanu's quiet contemplation. He stared out the window, watching the cityscape blur past, but his mind was far from the towering buildings and bustling streets. His thoughts lingered on the faces of the students, the fear in their eyes, and the pain etched deeply into the gunman's trembling voice. It wasn't just about what had happened today, he thought. It was about what led up to it, the unseen struggles, the isolation, the silent cries for help that went unanswered. Keanu knew the feeling of being caught in a storm like that, though he had never faced it in quite the same way. He had always managed to find his way through, whether by sheer willpower or the kindness of others who reached out when he needed it most. That thought stayed with him, heavy and unshakable. "Everything okay back there, sir?" the driver asked, glancing at Keanu through the rearview mirror. Keanu blinked, pulled from his reverie. He turned to the driver, offering a small, polite smile. "Yeah," he said. "Just thinking." The driver nodded, seeming to understand without pressing further. "That was a brave thing you did today," he said after a moment. Not many people would have had the guts to face something like that head-on. Keanu shifted slightly in his seat, his humility making it difficult for him to accept the praise. "I just did what felt right," he said quietly. "I couldn't stand by and do nothing." The driver nodded again, his expression thoughtful. "Well, you made a difference," he said. "You saved lives. That's something to be proud of." Keanu didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze back to the window, his mind still restless. He appreciated the sentiment, but pride wasn't what he felt. What lingered was a sense of unfinished business, a nagging thought that there was still so much more to do. The SUV pulled up to Keanu's building, a sleek, modern structure with floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the fading light of the evening. The driver stepped out, opening the door for him, but Keanu lingered for a moment before climbing out. He felt the weight of the day pressing down on him as he walked into the lobby, nodding politely to the doorman who greeted him with a warm smile. Upstairs, the spacious apartment was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. Keanu set his keys down on the counter and stood for a moment, letting the silence wash over him. Normally, he appreciated the peace. After long days on set or in the public eye, it was a welcome reprieve. But tonight, the quiet felt heavy, almost oppressive. He moved to the living room, sinking into the couch and running a hand through his hair. His mind raced, replaying the events of the day in vivid detail. The gunman's trembling hands, their broken voice, the way they had finally let the weapon fall to the ground. It had been a small victory, but one that felt monumental in the moment. Keanu leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees as he let out a slow, measured breath. He thought about Ms. Harper and the students, about the young boy who had looked up at him with wide eyes and said he wanted to be brave. He thought about the gunman, now sitting in a cold, sterile cell, their future uncertain but not without hope. The thought of that hope, the fragile spark he had seen in the gunman's eyes, gave him a sense of purpose. He couldn't just walk away from this, couldn't let it fade into the background as another news story destined to be forgotten in a week's time. There had to be more he could do. Reaching for his phone, Keanu scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. Karen Weiss, a close friend and advocate for mental health awareness. He pressed the call button, listening to the dial tone as he leaned back into the couch. Keanu. Karen's voice was warm and cheerful as she answered. It's been a while. How are you? Keanu smiled faintly, her familiar tone providing a small measure of comfort. Hey, Karen. I'm good. Well, kind of. It's been a long day. Sounds like it, Karen said, her voice softening. What's going on? Keanu hesitated for a moment, gathering his thoughts. I was at a school today, he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. There was a situation, a gunman. I managed to talk them down, but it's been weighing on me. Karen was silent for a moment, letting his words sink in. That's wow, she said finally. That must have been intense. Are you okay? Yeah, Keanu said, though his voice lacked conviction. Physically, I'm fine. But it made me think about how many people are out there feeling like that, so lost, so desperate, they don't see another way out. Karen sighed softly. It's more common than most people realize, she said. And it's heartbreaking. But the fact that you were able to reach them, to get through to them, that's huge, Keanu. Not everyone can do that. It doesn't feel like enough, Keanu admitted. I want to do more. I just don't know where to start. Karen's voice took on a thoughtful tone. Well, you've always been someone who leads with kindness and compassion, she said. Maybe you can use this experience to start a conversation, to bring more attention to the importance of mental health and community support? Keanu nodded slowly, even though she couldn't see him. I like that idea, he said. But it has to be more than just talk. I want to create something tangible, something that can actually help people. Karen's smile was evident in her voice. That's exactly what we need more of, she said. And if anyone can make it happen, it's you. The two of them spent the next hour brainstorming, their conversation flowing easily as they discussed ideas for programs, partnerships, and initiatives that could provide resources for those struggling with mental health challenges. Keanu felt a renewed sense of energy as they talked, the weight on his chest lifting slightly with each new idea. By the time they hung up, a plan was beginning to take shape in Keanu's mind. He couldn't fix everything, but he could take a step, just one step toward creating a world where fewer people felt like they had nowhere to turn. And maybe, just maybe, that step would inspire others to do the same. The next morning, Keanu sat at his desk, a cup of coffee steaming beside him as he typed out an email to his team. He outlined his vision for a foundation focused on mental health awareness and support, detailing the ideas he had discussed with Karen and emphasizing the urgency of the work. As he hit send, he felt a spark of determination light within him. This was just the beginning, but it was a beginning he felt deeply connected to. He thought of Ms. Harper, the students, the young boy who wanted to be brave, and the gunman whose pain had been palpable. They were the reason he was doing this, the reason he couldn't walk away. Over the next few weeks, the foundation began to take shape. Keanu threw himself into the work, meeting with mental health professionals, educators, and community leaders to build a network of resources. He gave interviews, not about his heroism, but about the importance of recognizing and addressing the struggles that so many people faced in silence. The story of the school incident spread, but Keanu deflected the spotlight, always redirecting the conversation back to the issues that mattered most. He spoke openly about his own experiences with loss and grief, hoping to break the stigma around mental health and encourage others to seek help. The work was exhausting, but it was also fulfilling in a way that nothing else had been. Keanu felt a sense of purpose that went beyond his career, beyond the roles he played on screen. He was making a difference, not just in the lives of the students and staff he had met that day, but in the lives of countless others who might never even know his name. One evening, as he sat in his office reviewing plans for an upcoming initiative, Keanu received an email from Ms. Harper. She wrote about how the students had been inspired by his visit, how they had started their own projects to support mental health awareness in their school. She included a photo of the young boy who had spoken to him in the courtyard, holding up a poster he had made that read, "Being brave starts with kindness." Keanu smiled as he stared at the photo, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and gratitude. The boy's words echoed in his mind, A reminder of why he had started this journey in the first place. Being brave starts with kindness. And sometimes, he thought, kindness could change the world.